Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to day 3 of our Science on a Sphere Earth Day show. So, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we are releasing a video every day leading up to Earth Day talking about how scientists monitor the Earth. So, yesterday we discussed infrared light and how it helps us view cloud movement across the Earth in the form of hurricanes. So, if you didn't catch that video, I'd highly recommend going back and watching it. You get to see some pretty cool hurricanes. But today we're continuing our talk about satellites that carry infrared light sensors and what they can tell us about the surface of the Earth. So remember, tune in every day for some new Earth Day content. Let's go ahead and get started. So, if you have not been tuning in for our last few videos, the way in which you are viewing this dataset is through an app on my phone. So you can actually download this app for free. It's called the SOS Explorer app. It's a pretty cool way to view geography, to learn it, and take a look at it. And it also has a lot of cool data sets about the Earth that you can learn and take a look at. So today we're going to be taking a look at the surface temperature on Earth. So this data set moves by pretty quickly. We'll start in North America first. So like I mentioned, we're going to be taking a little bit of a talk about infrared light. So infrared light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. I know that's a really big word. So visible light is a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Visible light is what we can see with our eyes. Our eyes cannot perceive infrared light, but we can sometimes perceive it as heat. And so infrared sensors on satellites are able to look at the temperature differences. So in our last video, we talked about how it can look at clouds and perceive clouds. But today we're going to be taking a look at the surface temperature of the Earth. So this data set comes from a few different satellites that NOAA has. So let me get that up and going. So our little legend down here. So the redder it is, the hotter it is, and the darker the blue, the colder it is. So this is showing us seasonal changes in temperature over the year. So you can see when it's winter, that blue kind of comes in over the North America and Canada. And then as it gets warmer into the summer, that darker red comes in. So that's showing us that seasonal change. Now, if you take a look at that same time over the water, it's not changing quite as much. It's still roughly in that orangish color. It never gets any of that blue color. So one thing that these infrared sensors on the satellites can tell us about the surface of the Earth is that water doesn't change temperature as quickly as land. And that's because of something called specific heat. Specific heat is basically just the amount of heat or energy that has to go into a certain type of object to actually raise the temperature. So the specific heat of water is a lot higher, so you need a lot more energy to change the temperature of the water as opposed to the land. The land's specific heat is pretty low. So that's why the temperature over the land changes a lot more quickly. And that's why if you live somewhere near water, like some of the Great Lakes, or by the ocean, the temperature doesn't change or fluctuate quite as much because of that specific heat of the water next to you. We can see that same effect up here in Europe as well. Now, if you notice, like Great Britain, its temperature doesn't change quite as drastically as the rest of Europe over here. It doesn't get quite as much of that blue or quite as much of that bright red. And that's because it is an island that is completely surrounded by water. So the water moderates the temperature. So that's why Great Britain, they don't tend to have those swings of temperature as much as some other places do. Now, one last cool thing that it can show us is on the southern hemisphere. So let's go take a look at Australia. So they get a lot of those really deep reds. They get a lot of heat. Now, keep in mind, Australia is a lot of land, especially like desert land. But it still doesn't seem to be changing quite as much as the northern hemisphere. Like they go from bright blue to bright red very, very quickly. And that's because in the southern hemisphere, even let's look over here in Africa, that's just because there isn't as much land in the southern hemisphere as compared to the northern. You basically have parts of Africa, Australia, and parts of South America. So there's not as much land there. So again, the water helps moderate those temperatures. So they don't have as much swinging back and forth in temperature as the northern hemisphere does, which is, in my opinion, pretty interesting, a pretty cool thing to think about. Water really does help moderate our temperature, and that's why it's so important for us to keep our oceans healthy and safe in these times where they are warming very, very quickly. Since they do help moderate our temperature, we need to keep them healthy. That has been our talk about surface temperature on the earth and on the water. Thanks for tuning in for our video, and hope you tune in tomorrow for our talk about precipitation. So we did talk about hurricanes, but we didn't talk about any precipitation. So hope you join us tomorrow for our talk about that. And thanks for tuning in.